And welcome to our level 4 revision session for decision and controls. Hopefully everyone in the room has, if you signed up kind of any time before the last 6 days or so, you should have received an email. On that email I sent a link of all the recordings that I have so far for these sessions, so you can download them and watch them in your own time. And I also attached a document, and that document is the question that we're going to be looking through today. So for those of you that haven't done these sessions before, let me just share my other screen with you. There we go. Okay. The procedure every week with me is always going to be the same. So what we will do on our evening together is we're going to go through one question. And I use that question as a revision tool. So I'm going to go through how I would attack the question. Absolutely, Morella. So anyone that hasn't been here before, at the end of today, or kind of after today, I'll go through the process and you'll see how it works. So today we go through a question. I go through the question on screen, and that's what I use as my revision aid. So every week I'm going to be choosing a different subject area. I will be coming back to subject areas from time to time. So some of those big subject areas like kind of performance management or performance measurement, variance analysis, we know they get examined a lot. So I am going to come back to those again and again and again. And then I'll look at other subjects in between. So, for instance, I have been asked by a couple of people to do something on activity-based costing. So that's something I'll be looking at over the next couple of weeks to put together for you. So I pick a question, use it as a revision tool. So I show you how I would attack the question. I go through quite a thorough explanation of how I go through the question. I kind of go through my thought process and the kind of things I think, and what markers are looking for. And then when we finish, what I do is that I then send an email round, and that email has got a link to the recording. Okay, that shows the recording of today's lesson. I also have been linking the recordings from prior sessions on there as well. So there's about 4 or 5 on there at the moment. I was saying at the beginning, what we're trying to do over the next couple of weeks is actually get these sessions onto YouTube so that you can easily find the full library of everything that we've done. And on that email, there will also be the question for the next week. So next week's question I send in advance. So really depends on how far you are ahead with your revision. If you are just trying to maintain your knowledge ready for the exam, then that question is something you could attempt. If you are kind of a little bit away from actually being exam ready, then what you can do is you can use that question as a tool to trigger some revision. So you can say, right, I know what we're covering this week with Dave, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my notes, I'm going to review that particular subject area, so I'm on point when it comes to the actual knowledge, and I can apply it on the session. So I don't expect you all to have done the question in advance. And really, that's the process. Okay, so whenever you come in, whenever you register, you'll be at some point kind of in that process. You'll either be attending a session having never seen anything before, okay, or you'll register, you'll get the email for next session, and then you'll be onto the system. So you've always got access to the other questions, providing we have got a recording. And I think some of you have picked up the very first session that I ran, we didn't actually take a recording of it. So there isn't a recording for session number 1, but all the others have sent links out there, and there will be links coming out in this week's email. Expect this email kind of, I would say, within 48 hours of today. So it should be with you in time for the weekend. So you've got a bit of time over this weekend with the bank holiday to take a look through subjects ready for next week. So the question that I sent out last time, this is another question that's written by the AAT. So it's one that they put together. So it is approved. It's in exam format. So it's in your exam format. It is a example of a task 5, and I know some of you may have seen some of these questions before. Okay, as we go through kind of future weeks, I'm going to be picking on other questions from other areas, and we should all be seeing, some of us will be seeing slightly newer questions every week. So task number 5, oh, let me try and underline that. There we go. Total of 18 marks. Okay, so it's a fairly decent mark allocation at this level. They're the kind of marks I'm expecting for most questions. And you'll notice that over the weeks that we've done this together, I try and pick on questions generally that have got a written requirement, just because I know that written requirements, the requirements that tend to trip us up, and they do tend to. When we look at the mark analysis of question 1 versus question 2 versus question 3, and we look at the average percentage mark, it's the written questions that always tend to drag people's marks down. So the average marks tend to be slightly behind the questions that are purely number driven. And as I kind of said, every week so far, the markers for these questions have no knowledge of the rest of your exam. So they don't know how good you were in all of the numerical questions. They don't know how great you were in the other written questions. They're judging your ability purely on this question. So you can't ever go into the exam saying, oh, that stuff I did in question 3 was so brilliant. They must know how amazing I am. So I don't need to write that stuff in task 5 because they know from task 3. They don't know, they haven't seen task 3. So as far as they're concerned, if you haven't told them in this task, then they're not going to give you credit for it. Okay, so we've got a question here, and as you guys have seen over the last few weeks, when I see these questions at level 4, I tend to kind of go through, and I've got this process of, I want to look first of all at the requirements. What am I being asked to do? I'm not too bothered straight away about the rest of the narrative. So here I've got section A, describe the following types of standards, and I can see there are 4 marks going for it. Now they're telling me I need to describe 2 types of standard, an ideal and a basic standard. So I'm thinking here 4 marks, well that's probably 2 marks for each of them. Okay, and you know, those of you that have seen me over the last few weeks, that I love doing this because, one, I don't like writing, and writing for 4 marks or 5 marks or 6 marks is quite a lot. And you think, I've got to make a lot of points there, I've got to write a lot. But writing for 1 or 2 marks is a lot easier. So I like taking those big mark allocations and reducing them down. So that looks fairly straightforward, but then we read on, okay, and we've got, as I said last time, I always read the first line, McDevitt Limited produces handmade boxes of chocolates. So instantly I'm thinking, brilliant, I love chocolate. Okay, so I'm already on side with this question. It's about chocolate. And then I ignore the numbers and things there, and I look straight away at the requirements. Discuss the type of variance that may arise under each type of standard and how it may affect employee behaviour. Now, I'm going to give bonus points out to people here. This question has got the word in it that I obsess about and talk about all the time, about how people don't understand it. So who in the chat will be the first person? Sarah, Lauren, Liz. Oh, you are all amazing. You're too good. Awesome. Absolutely right. That word and. Okay. And those of you that haven't been in the room before, that word and is so important. So many people think I'm going to answer the question up to the and then ignore everything after it. So loads of people are going to write, discuss the type of variance that may arise under each type of standard, and that's all they're going to do. And then the other bit, and how it may affect employee behaviour, they're going to ignore altogether. So many people do that. And, I always think of, the word and as kind of like being like the balance in a set of scales. Okay, so you've got half the answer on one side and half of the answer on the other side. And if you misunderstand what that and means, you're missing half of the question. If you're missing half the question, you're missing half the marks. Okay, so I mean, in terms of this question, when we actually go to look at it, the marks aren't quite equally spread between the two. There's slightly more to be said about one part than the other part. But if you misunderstand the ands, okay, it's going to cause you problems. And it does mean you're going to go through the question, oh, I've done really well, I've answered everything. And you'll be surprised when your marks are much lower, and your marks are much lower because you didn't see the and you missed that part. So at 9 marks there, that's a big allocation. Okay, but I'm already thinking what each type of standard, and for the first part, it told me that 2 different types of standards, and how it might affect employee behaviour. So I'm thinking, well, there's 2 things to do here. There's probably 2 things to do here, one for each type of standard and how it impacts behaviour. So I'm already thinking there's at least 4 things that I need to talk about here. 9 marks shared between 4. That's what, just a little bit over 2 for each question, for each element. So again, I've taken 9 marks, which looks horrid, and I've converted it into 2 marks, which look nice. I can write for 2 marks. 2 marks is 2 sentences. Okay, 9 marks, that sounds like an essay. So I don't like essays, but I like writing 2 sentences. And then we've got this part here. 5 marks in total. Recommend possible improvements to the existing standards for ingredients and labour. Okay, so again, there is an and there. Okay, so ingredients and labour. Use calculations to support your recommendations. Now, this is different to the question we saw 2 weeks ago. Okay, here it says, use calculations to support your recommendations. I think, actually, it might have been last week, the question said, you can use calculations. Okay, so here it's not saying you can, it's saying you can, it's saying to use calculations. So they're expecting you to use calculations. And there is something in this question when it comes to the calculations that loads of people, and I think by loads of people, I'm thinking at least 75% of people sitting this exam are going to make the same mistake with the calculations. There's something that I think only a very small number of people are actually going to get right with the calculations that support it. One of the calculations is straightforward, but one of them's just got a little nasty trick that's going to cause, I think, quite a few people problems. So 5 marks here. Again, they're telling me here to talk about improvements for ingredients, improvements for labour. So again, I'm thinking a couple of marks for each of those. So in reading the question, what straight away looks horrible as a 5 mark written bit, a 4 mark written bit, a 9 mark written bit, we've now broken down into just loads of little 2 mark questions. And the 2 mark questions are much, much more straightforward than the big questions. So now I can start attacking the question. So first of all, describe the following types of standard: ideal and basic standards. Okay, and then it gives us information. So this is pure textbook knowledge. Okay, so there's nothing there that requires you to apply or requires you to know about any kind of scenario. It's pure textbook knowledge. What are the following types of standard? Okay, ideal standard, basic standard. Now, when we talk about standards, okay, most of the time we're dealing with standard cost. And standard cost is what we tend to think of when we're dealing with standards. Okay, so when I talk about a standard really is a kind of a target. If you set the standard for something, you're setting a target, or you're setting a forecast, or you're making a plan. And I would talk about that standards in terms of something that we know as accountants. Okay, so you can talk about a standard is a plan or a target. Okay, and you can then elaborate that, and you can say, for example, a standard cost is the planned cost of 1 unit. Okay, now what I've done, all I've done there is I've given the examiner something a little bit more than the examiner is asking for. So I've given them really a definition of what I mean by a standard. And the only reason that I've done that is really to put the examiner's mind at rest. So the examiner now thinks, oh, right, this student understands what a standard is, and they've got an example of a standard. Now, why that helps me is now when I talk about ideal standards and basic standards, I've now got the right to start talking about standard cost. A standard cost is what I know about. Okay, so I can say, well, an ideal standard versus a basic standard. Now, an ideal standard, okay, is the target that's based on perfect operating conditions. So I would then say, e.g., let me do it the other way. For a standard cost, this would mean perfect, which I've already used the word perfect, would mean no wastage no errors, optimal efficiency. Okay, so ideal standard, we are aiming for perfection. Okay, we are aiming for our production to be perfect, everything to be right first time, nothing to fail, our purchasing decisions to be amazing, no wastage, no damage, no poor goods, no rejects, everything perfect. And instantly we should be thinking, well, are we ever going to have the perfect operating conditions? Because perfect operating conditions are, the ideal world. Now, basic are sometimes referred to as historic standards. And these are standards that are unchanged over time. Okay, so it's based on historic costs and usage. So we set our target, or we set our standard, we worked out what the cost would be per unit based on something that happened 10 years ago. So 10 years ago, when we first started making this product, this is the amount of ingredients we needed, this is the amount of labour time, this is the labour rate. Okay, now it's something that was done years ago, hasn't been updated since. So with both of these forms of standards, we know that there are issues with them. Perfect operating conditions never happen. Okay, perfect operating conditions, is the perfect world. We don't live in the perfect world. We live in a world where stuff goes wrong. Basic or historic standards, well, we don't live in the past. We don't live 10 years ago. Lots of things happen over time. Okay, costs increase over time. Okay, machinery gets better and better and better as we have new technologies that are put together and new technologies that are produced that can make things more quickly. People over time get trained and become more efficient and become quicker at doing their job. And all those things are going to alter the structure of how we manufacture things. Okay, so we know that there are issues with them, okay, and that's really what the rest of the question's about. So this part here is just, do you have the textbook knowledge? Okay, can you explain what each of these types of standards are? Okay, can you explain them? Can you give me a brief example of when you'd see them? Okay, easily, we're looking at 4 marks there. Okay, so 2 marks, ideal standard, what is it? Give me a brief example. Basic standard that's not changed over time, based on what? Based on historic cost, usage. We came up with it a long time ago, easily got 4 marks there. But then we've got some real information, some real data. So McDevitt Limited produces handmade boxes of chocolates. The existing standard for 1 box of chocolates is detailed below. So we've got ingredient costs, packaging costs, direct labour, total prime cost of £4. And then it says that we use ideal standards for all ingredients and basic standards for all of its direct labour. So we've got this crazy situation where we're saying, well, perfect world, what would the ingredients be? If there was no wastage, we've made the best buying decisions and we bargained the best prices, how much ingredient would we need? And then labour, well, what did we do 10 years ago? Okay, let's use that as our target. So a right mismatch of different types of techniques. And one of the things that they don't have here that, I would almost expect you guys to be thinking is that they've given us this standard cost for 1 box of chocolates. And just think, with the ingredients are always calculated based on how much ingredient you use and what price you pay for that ingredient. So it's normally, say for ingredients, some amount of kilograms or grams or milliliters or something like that at a certain price. And labour, we know, is a certain number of hours at a certain rate, a certain wage rate that we pay every hour. Okay, so that's just something that I always think helps me with my variance analysis. So my variance analysis is always based on, for materials, did I use more or did I pay more? One of the two, usage or was it cost? Usage or was it price? Awesome. So they use ideal. So these ones are ideal. And these ones are basic. And then we've got my question with my favourite word, "and" in it. Discuss the types of variance that may arise under each type of standard and how it may affect employee behaviour. Okay, so what would I do? The first thing it says is discuss the type of variance that may arise under each type of standard. So exactly the same as the first point, I write one sentence as an introduction. Okay, I don't like more than a sentence, but I do like just to set the scene because I like to tell the examiner I know what I'm talking about. I don't like just to jump in. And remember the test that I talked about last week where I said, imagine you're trying to explain it to someone that's not an accountant. And I always use the my mum test. Could I pick up the phone and speak to my mum who's not an accountant and explain this to her? And if I can with my answer, then I've answered the question really well. If I ring up my mum and read her what I've written and she doesn't understand it, I haven't been clear enough. Okay, so I always think real text and complex like these concepts and in terms that non-accountants but as AAT accountants bring real value to the businesses we work for. So first of all, variances. We come up with a very brief explanation of what a variance is to set the scene. And I just go through what is a variance. Well, all a variance is, it's the difference between standard cost and actual cost. It's the difference between standard and actual. And then I would just say variances can be adverse or favourable. Now, if you really wanted to, okay, you could say, if you were talking to my mum, what does adverse mean? It has a negative impact on profit, and favourable, positive impact on profit. Okay, I think that's kind of like just adding a little bit of extra detail. Whether you'd have time to add that, I don't know. Okay, that's the bit that I just put in red there is, you know, if you are really on top of your stuff, can you get into the question quickly and you're typing fast and you're really getting a good answer, and yes, you'd have time to do it. I think most people, you know, spend that bit of time thinking about the question, understanding it, and then start presenting their answers. And I think I'm not convinced you'd have time in the exam to put the bits in red, but I'd be happy with they can be adverse or favourable. And then what I would do is I'd say, well, I'm talking about two things. Okay, I'm talking about the types of variance that might arise under each type of standard. So we've got ideal standard, which is the ingredients. And we've got the basic standard, and that's the labour. So I've got two subparts to the question. So I know what a variance is, and then what variances am I likely to get if I set an ideal standard? So first thing, ideal standard, we said in the first part, and we've told the examiner, I know an ideal standard is the perfect operating conditions. So I'm going to set a target to my team and say, I want you to achieve perfection. Okay, I want no wastage. I want perfect efficiency. I want you to produce things super fast. Okay, it's just ingredients and so on. No wastage. I want to make brilliant buying decisions. I don't want you to overspend. I want you to negotiate the best possible prices. Now, at the end of a period of time, does anyone actually achieve perfection? Is anyone sitting there going, well, I know that, you know, someone sets me a target to be perfect, and I'm perfect every time? Never. Okay, and you know, we'd say the same with, you know, with us in exams. Okay, perfection is getting 100%. Okay, do we get 100% in every exam? Okay, if anyone does get 100% in every exam, you probably don't need to be here tonight, okay, because you already know enough to pass the exam. So setting someone a target of being perfect, okay, very, very few people ever achieve perfection. Okay, what's going to happen is you're going to fall short somewhere, which means you're not going to achieve it. which means that you're not going to do as well as planned. So I would expect that the variances here are likely to be adverse, have a negative impact on profit. So when compared to budget, we're always going to fall short. Okay, and why is that? Well, in terms of things like usage is likely to be higher than expected. Okay, because there will be wastage. There will be damaged or rejected goods. It's just a fact of production. Whenever you make something, something goes wrong. And I don't know if anyone here does work for any kind of manufacturing business. I've worked for a few manufacturing businesses in my time, and every single one of them accepted that there would be a certain degree of wastage. There are very few businesses where every single item you produce is perfect every single time. Okay, so likely to be adverse because usage is likely to be higher. I would also say that the price is also likely to be higher. We're likely to be spending more because I don't know about your works, but there's always times when something goes wrong with the ordering process and you need to order something in an emergency at short notice. Okay, it happens all the time. Okay, we occasionally have it with photocopier paper or with printing or with sets of notes for our classes or with textbooks. And it's, oh, we've got a class starting next week and we don't have enough textbooks, so we need to get an emergency delivery. And that emergency delivery has extra postage and you don't get the discounts that you would get for massive orders because you only need to get 5 delivered. Okay, so, and all those things happen in every business. If we're making chocolate, suddenly we realise on Monday we don't have enough sugar for chocolate production this week. We need to get some emergency sugar delivered, and our supplier says, well, this is completely out of the ordinary. We're going to have to charge you extra to deliver this special delivery of sugar by the end of this week. So price is likely to be high because we're going to require emergency deliveries, which means we could lose discounts. We may have to pay extra delivery costs. All of those mean we'll be ending up spending more than budget, more than targets. Okay, so what we've done here for our marks is we've said that the variances are likely to be adverse. So many people stop the question there. Variance is going to be adverse, finish. That doesn't sound to me like many marks. Why is that? Well, it's going to be adverse because we're likely to use more than expected. Okay? Because there is going to be wastage and we need to take that into account. Because some goods are going to become damaged and we're going to have to make them a second time. And that's going to require more material. Some are going to be rejected through not being good enough. We need to make them all over again or repair them or apply extra material to them. And also purchasing is likely to be more. Okay. Then we've got the basic standard, and we said labour was based on a standard that was very old. Okay, so I would think that as we're basing the standard on something that was written 10 years ago, I think that we're likely, actually, let's go through it. So basic standard in terms of labour. Oh. There we go. We've got labour is based on what? Hours multiplied by pounds per hour. So this is just my working, it's not actually the narrative. Now, in terms of basic standard, if it was set 10 years ago, okay, the wage rate 10 years ago was a lot lower than the wage rate right now. So I would say that in terms of the rate variance, well, it's likely to be adverse because historically wages were less per hour than now. Okay, that to me makes sense. Okay, so I'm likely to have a rate variance that's going to be adverse. But what about the number of hours? Okay, so what about our people's efficiency? Now, I would argue in most factories over the last 10 years or over any period of time, absolutely. So we've got one person that's saying that it's likely to be favourable. Thanks for that. Absolutely right. So I think likely to be favourable because, you know, if you've got a factory that's been around for 10 years, I expect that factory to be quicker now at production than it was 10 years ago. Okay, because so I'm expecting that, you know, over time, people become more efficient. I'm just going to make a little note here. It's quite a rubbish note. Plus, you know, we tend to have better machinery. Over time, our machinery gets better. Okay, we know computers get better, but production machinery also improves over time. Okay, so from rate variance. Okay, so rate variance, someone just asked me to rewrite it. Sorry, likely to be adverse. Okay, and then I apologize for all these words because historically wages were less per hour than they are now. Okay, so but if you can't read it, I apologise. There will be a recording that comes out, so you can hear it again if need be. And then efficiency likely to be favourable. Over time, people become more efficient. Okay, and I've just made a little note here. I'll put it in a sentence. And we're also likely to have better machinery that's quicker and that's faster and that's better to produce, or can produce things more quickly. Now, I'm going to go onto a separate page because I know that when I'm squashing stuff at the bottom of these pages, as you can see, my writing does tend to take a negative turn. The other part of it said, the other part of the question asked, and, okay, it was the and, how it may affect employee behaviour. We have those two standards, the ideal standards and the basic standard. Now, I do think in this question, of those 9 marks, most of them are here, okay? But some of them have to be over here for how they're going to impact on people's behaviour. Okay, so if I've got a standard that's set at a perfect level, okay, and I've set my standard, or we said earlier, standard sometimes called a target. So if I set the target on the perfect operating conditions, now I'm going to my workforce and I'm saying, right, put together a budget for you. You've got this lovely target. It's based on you being perfect. Okay, so maybe you get a bonus and your bonus is based on achieving the target. So Liliana said, okay, that's going to demotivate because staff can never reach the target. I absolutely agree. Okay, absolutely. They could potentially lose out on their bonuses. Okay, and I do believe that if you set staff or you set anyone a target, okay, and that target is achievable, okay, and you give them some rewards for achieving it, you're going to get people working towards that target. If any of those things are missing, if it's not achievable, no one's going to work towards it. If there isn't any form of reward, I don't think it's going to be. It's going to motivate people in a way. You know, and I kind of like to look at things like, you know, if I set you up a target that is, you know, that is completely out of reach, and let's think about, you know, I could give you a target and say, what I'd like you to do is by the end of August, I'd like you to run 100 meters and beat the 100 meters world record. And if you do that, I'll give you £20 million. Okay, now I've set you a target there, but it's set at pretty much the ideal level. Okay, assuming you are the perfect human being in terms of running, I'll give you £10 million if you do it. I can't see many of you are going to work hard to do it. because we already know that we're never going to be at that level athletically. I mean, if someone is at that level athletically, well done, you are amazing. Okay, I take it back, I'm not going to give you £10 million. But most people wouldn't even bother training for it because you're never, ever going to reach that kind of level. So I do think that it can demotivate. Oh, I love that. So you've also said potentially high staff turnover. Okay, I like that. So okay, so we're thinking that high staff turnover, people are likely to leave. Okay, I think you're absolutely right. That's all. The whole thing. If you've got staff that are demotivated, or you're setting them impossible targets, then staff can be demotivated. They can decide to leave. Now there are some businesses out there that that do set standards at this level. That do set standards at a perfect level, assuming perfect operating conditions. Okay? And generally what you find is that those businesses, they don't tend to give people bonuses based on achieving those ideal standards. They tend to give people bonuses on their movement towards those ideal standards. So there are some companies, like I think Honda do it, I think Toyota do it, where they say we're aiming for perfection in our production, but what we will do is we will give you a bonus for making steps towards perfection rather than achieving perfection outright. Okay, so we said that ideal standards won't motivate people. Okay, likely to demotivate them, make them feel unhappy because you're setting them impossible targets. What about basic standards? So we said these are old and out of date and based on something that happened 10 years ago. What impact is this likely to have on employee behaviour? Are we likely to feel motivated? Too easy. So well done, Joshua. I'm saying Joshua, not Josh. So too easy. Absolutely. Okay, which means that, right, so we've got someone that said inefficient, laziness, inefficiency. I'm going to write these down here. Okay, idle time. Okay, right, be a little bit careful. Okay, when it comes to kind of the AAT looking at your questions, something that the AAT don't like is they don't like you kind of like, what's the right term, kind of jumping to kind of like an extreme conclusion. And one of the things they don't like is that if you've got a question where you've got your production team are not working as hard as they should do, one thing they don't like is you recommending that they're sacked. Okay, what they like is if people aren't efficient, they like you recommending that they should be trained and mentors and they should be improved rather than we get rid of them. Okay, and so in terms of if staff are being set a target that's too easy, okay, then there is no incentive to improve. Okay, absolutely. So you've got not stretching enough. Staff sit back once the standard's been achieved. Okay, so there's no incentive to improve. Absolutely, which means that you could lose efficiency savings. Now, if staff could work harder, okay, I love that. Yeah, demotivating too. Okay, I think so. Okay, I don't like, if I'm set a target that's impossible, okay, then you give up at some point because you never ever achieve that. Okay, if you set a target that's too easy, it's like, well, why am I bothering? Okay, I've already done it. Okay, it's what's the point? Okay, I don't need to work any harder. I've already done the thing that I've been asked to do. Okay, so I think you're absolutely right. I think it can be demotivating as well. The thing that I would watch out for is, we've got terms here. Okay, I wouldn't use the term laziness. Okay, I would use the term inefficiency. I'd use the term idle time. Okay, I was thinking the laziness is quite a harsh term to use about another member of staff, and I prefer saying that we're losing out on efficiencies or people don't have the incentive to improve. Okay, and I would say that idle time just means that we're paying people to do work and there isn't work for them to do. And that could happen because timetabled 7 hours for them to produce something, but that's 7 hours based on what it took us 10 years ago. We've now got these brand new machines that are twice as fast. So now people are sitting around afterwards because we haven't given them extra work to do, because we think they're going to be busy based on what happened in the past. Okay, so idle time is something that the AAT do tend to build into questions. So I think brilliant there from you guys. Okay, you guys answered both of those parts, came up with loads and loads of really good ideas. Okay, again, you know, we're looking at a total of 9 marks across that question. We said that there were 2 bits either side of the and, I'd say 5 and 4 or 4 and 5. Okay, and then suddenly you've got, what, 2 for each of them. You've easily got 2 marks for each part of those things. Okay, good stuff. Right. Okay, I can see there are quite a few things that have come up in the little chat bowl that haven't kind of gone through order and stuff. I've missed your comment, and I apologise. Right, last part of the question. Only 5 marks. Okay, and this is where I mentioned right at the beginning of today. So those of you that were kind of settling in at the beginning and like switching your microphones on and making sure your cameras were off and all that kind of stuff, you may have missed out on it. I did say that I'm running over the next few weeks a series of math sessions. Tomorrow's one is the first one, so tomorrow at 5 o'clock is the first one. It's going to be Wednesdays at 5 o'clock. Tomorrow's probably going to be at a level that you don't need to know for your AAT exams, but after that it should be covering the material that you will need. And this is something that made me think of it when I was kind of like reviewing this question before we came back on tonight, is that there are actually some little maths tricks here that are going to trip some people up in the exam. So we've got some information here. McDevitt Limited has provided the following additional information. Okay, we're asking to recommend possible improvements to the existing standards. Okay, I will be covering things like rearranging equations. There's a tiny bit of that in tomorrow's, but I will be looking at things that are probably more relevant to you over future weeks, but I'll put the link up in the chat. So provide the following additional information. The standard of quality of all ingredients has been calculated on the basis that no chocolate is spoiled in production. Last year, the average level of wastage was 5%. So on average, we wasted 5% of the chocolate that went in. So that was through spillage, through bits burning, through pouring it into the molds, having it splashing around the place. 5% of all the chocolate was lost. Okay, the remaining 95% went into our products. There was some wastage. The standard time to produce a box of chocolates was set many years ago when the business was first started. The production process is now more automated. Okay, so we've got more machinery doing stuff, and productivity has improved by about 20%. McDevitt now wants to use normal or attainable standards for all ingredients and direct labour. So attainable standards just assume a realistic level of efficiency and improvement. So attainable standards are what we should really be setting. We should really be setting standards based on a realistic level of efficiency, showing us an amount of improvement that we think is achievable. Not achieving perfection straight away, but moving up and improving what we do. Okay, and says, what would the improvements be in terms of ingredients? Okay, now currently, ingredients are set at the ideal level, and currently the ingredient cost is £2. Okay, if we were setting this at an attainable level, we need to factor in that 5% wastage. Okay. Now, we know in the perfect world, it costs me £2 in terms of ingredients. Okay, so £2 worth of ingredients is the amount of ingredient that I actually need to go into my product. Okay, so this is the bit where sometimes I'm going to write this in pink. Okay, so this is what I would sketch as kind of my little working alongside kind of the questions that I'm going through. So in terms of my working, I'd just be thinking that, well, the amount that I need is £2. Okay, so that's the amount that I need to manufacture. That's the amount that goes into my product. Perfect world, remember, there was no wastage. But now what we're saying is that I need to build in wastage. Okay, I need to build in what an average level of wastage of 5%. Okay, so 5% of all of the ingredients that I put in are going to be spilt, and the remaining 95% are going to be sent off to manufacture stuff. Okay, so I'm going to put in, let's call it 100% of my ingredients. 95% are going to be used to make my product, and 5% are going to be dropped on the floor and wasted. Okay, so that means that the new standards, okay, means that I need to work out what that 100% is. Okay, so I know that currently I spent £2. But that £2 is only going to be 95% of what I'm buying. Okay, because I still need to buy the stuff that's going to be wasted. So to work out the actual new cost, I need to buy 100%, and I know that £2 is actually 95% of the material that I need. So I need to buy a little bit extra. Now, if I do that maths, that gives me a cost of £210. I think it's 53p. Perfect. Someone actually did the maths ahead of me there. Luke did it. Perfect stuff. Well done, Luke. That was awesome. No, absolutely right. So multiply by 100 over 95. And the reason that I put that up, and the reason I'm really, really specific there, is because what loads of people do is they just kind of add 5% on. Okay, and they're adding 5% on to 100%. They're not dealing with the fact this is what I need, and this will be 95% of what I buy, and I need to work out what that extra 5% BART is to work out overall what the 100% that I need to buy is. Okay, it sounds like it's simple, but so many people make a mistake with that part. Okay, and that's the bit when it says use calculations to support your recommendation. There may only be 5 marks here. Okay, and there may be, 1 mark for talking here about you need to factor in the 5% wastage, because you're absolutely right. You have to tell the examiner that's what you're doing. But because they're saying use a calculation, there will be at least a mark. Okay, let me just check. Someone said, should that be £2.11? I think in there that it's £211, I think. 2.11. Have I done? Yes, you're right. For some reason, I've dropped the decimal places there, haven't I? So let me just rub that. Let's go through. Yeah, absolutely right. So that should be 2.1153, isn't it? I think 2.1053 even. Yeah. Okay, you're absolutely right. Would round to 211. Okay, cool. Yeah, for some reason, yeah, that's my fault because of the way that I typed it, the way I wrote it out on the page here and then typed it into my phone to get the answer out. I've missed the decimal place when I typed it in, but no, absolutely right. So the numbers are correct. It was just the decimal place there that was slightly out. I think I typed in 200 rather than £2. Cool. The other part's a lot nicer. So the other part, which was the materials, not materials, it's label, isn't it? Just done materials. And we know that labour was based on the basic standard. And we know that labour was a cost of £1.50. but it says productivity is improved by about 20%. So we have improved productivity by 20%. So we know that that £1.50 was based on what we did 10 years ago, but we now know that we're 20% better now than we used to be. Okay, so that £101.50 is effectively, 100% last year, but we've got 20% better. So the new standard, I would just work out as £1.50. We're 80%, sorry, we're 20% better than we were, which means we're now only taking 80% of the time that we were back in 10 years ago when this was written. So multiply that by 0.8 or 80%, depending on how you want to write it. I've got to type that calculation. So I'm at that £1.20. Factoring in the fact that we're 20% better now than we were before. And remember, that's slightly different to the calculation we did with the 5% wastage and to gross up the 5%. And so it gives us a slightly different type of calculation. So again, if I'm marking, I'm giving you a mark here for saying we need to look at productivity and we need to factor that in, but I'm also giving you a mark for doing the maths around that productivity. Perfect. Awesome stuff. That brings us to the end of that question, which is almost exactly at 8 o'clock. Okay, so I mentioned it before. Okay, and thank you for, I can't remember who it was, but thank you for the person who said, can you just go through and read out what I wrote again. As you can see, kind of as because I'm using kind of one of these crazy pens, at the top of the page, okay, it's all quite nice, but as I get to the bottom of the page, I'm kind of like leaning half off the screen. Okay, my writing goes all over the place, and my writing's not great to start with. So if you can't read stuff, then please shout at me kind of as we go through. But as I mentioned at the beginning, okay, we have got this little process going. So at the end of today, I will stop recording. I will send out the recording within the next 48 hours with the question that we'll look at next Tuesday. So next Tuesday's day after bank holiday, isn't it? So we should all be fine and ready to go. One thing I have mentioned, or a couple of things just to quickly mention to you. I am going to put up a link in the chat in a minute for the maths sessions that I'm running. So if you want to register for them, you can do. I will warn you, tomorrow's session is going to be about simultaneous equations. You need them for ACCA, you need them for CMA, you do not need them for AAT. So if you do log on tomorrow and you want to do it, it will be purely for fun, because you're not going to need it for any of the qualifications at all for AAT at this level. But I say you will need them for CMA, you will need them for ACCA if you go on there. And the other thing also to watch out for, so that is tomorrow. Okay, and the other thing to watch out for tomorrow is that we're running a student practical experience records event tomorrow. So the maths one is at 5, this one is at 6. Now, it is again aimed at CMA ACCA students to help them with the records that they need to do. Yes, we are having a class next week. Absolutely, definitely, we are having a class next week. It's all about how you complete your practical experience record to show the evidence of what you've done as an accountant over the course of your training. Absolutely necessary if you're doing those higher level subjects, but if you are, and if I give you an example, for ACCA, you need to be able to demonstrate how you've shown leadership skills, and you need to write a statement to show how you've demonstrated leadership skills to get your qualification. If you guys are looking for a promotion at work, or you're looking to change career, or you're looking at your next role on the job ladder, the chances are you're going to have to apply for a role, either internally or externally, where you're going to have to do things like show or show how you've demonstrated leadership skills in your career. So all of the things that we talk about tomorrow are the kind of things that you're going to need to know as you build your career. So it would be worth attending, and that's our weekly Zoom forum. I know some of you on the call have been on that before. Definitely worth coming along. Also math session as well. So let me just put in the chat my math session. I've called it, I think if you do register for it, I think it's called something like Dave's Maths Club, which I came up with myself. So let me just post it up here. So hopefully you guys can all see that in the chat message. So if you do want to attend it, just copy that link, put it in your browser, type in your details the way you do for any Zoom meeting, and you should then be registered ready for tomorrow. I say tomorrow is going to be tough. It's specifically written for tomorrow's session for some ACCA students that asked me if I could help them with some of the simultaneous equations. The PR event, let me just find it for you. Will there be a recording for the maths one? Yeah, I'm fully expecting there to be a recording for the maths one. I'm just trying to find you the PER event for tomorrow. If you haven't been on one of our student forums before, let me just dig it out. Here we go. The PR event is being put on now. Okay, I'm just going to put it there. So it's a bit longer, it's a bit more messy because I just copied it down, but the PR event's there. It's our new normal student forum. It's every single Wednesday at 6 o'clock. So feel free to sign up to those. How long do you have to access the recordings for? I don't know. It's down to Zoom, how long Zoom hosts them for. What we're planning on doing, for those of you that arrived late, is we are planning to get these sessions transferred from Zoom and put them onto our YouTube channel. So I would hope within the next few weeks you'll start to see them popping up on YouTube. So they'll be hosted there pretty much forever. So thanks to everyone for attending today. I'm going to